As we are getting together here, I just want to extend a great big welcome to you. Know that whatever your faith or your worldview or your ethnicity or your gender identity or orientation or experience level with interfaith engagement, this is the space of welcome. We welcome however you orient around faith, including hyphens or not claiming a specific tradition or connection. So know that this is a unique space where we recognize that the values and faith we hold help to shape our identity and understanding. The mission of Interfaith Philadelphia is to help people of all backgrounds to live, to work, and be a healthy community together. Interfaith Philadelphia was created as a response to the divisiveness and fear in the wake of 9/11 to help people to build connection and understanding and trust across beliefs to foster respect and peace. We continue this work as our nation recognizes 250 years of religious freedom then and now, and with this series that we have been sharing as Everyday Faith, featuring a window into various traditions. Know that at Interfaith Philadelphia, we believe that understanding who is our neighbor may be one of the most powerful perspectives we have for building community and guiding our civic life. But when you truly come into relationship with one another, when we hear what's breaking someone's heart, listen to the ordinary challenges of their day, and learn about their hopes and fears, something within can shift. We begin to see one another not as strangers, but as neighbors. Now, I understand that there is much happening in our world today. I want to acknowledge that there is bias and discrimination related suffering in our world. Somewhere at this very moment, there is anger, violence, and suffering related to religious discrimination and other forms. We also know that in this very moment, there are beautiful and amazing acts of kindness that are happening among people with a range of inspiration, rather secular or religious. Our hopes you learn about other people and yourself, and that you leave this experience even more curious and open to learn more. So we'll continue at this moment with a brief introduction of our moderators and a review of our shared commitments before we dive in to speaking with our panel. I invite Trina to share in this moment.
So as we engage in this discussion today, would like for us all to be mindful of some of these shared commitments, be open to learn and grow. We want to be mindful of our voices and share the airtime, being mindful of how much we speak so that we can create space for others to share. Be present. It's so challenging today because we have technology all around us and alerts and everything popping up. Try not to multitask. Use I statements. We so want to hear your perspective. So we encourage you when sharing to use those statements using I so that we can get a personal reflection. Listen to understand rather than to respond. So deep listening and engaging. And there are times when we're hearing things and we may not have a resolution to a thought or an idea, but we can still hold that idea for further reflection and engagement. We also share the commitment to lean into discomfort. There might be statements made that could raise questions or some discomfort, and reflect upon the self-discovery in that moment. What are we learning about ourselves in the moment, and how are we engaging with what we've heard? And then I think of confidentiality as gift giving. When someone has shared something in confidence, they've given me a gift, and oftentimes that will expand my perspective. And I want to make sure that I can share the learning so that the lessons that I learned in that process I can share, but their stories, they stay, and that's the gift that is given by the individual themselves. So they get to share their stories. I get to share my learning, my lessons from that. We also want to remember that in this gathering, we shall not proselytize, so that there's no conversion pressure to another faith or another way of thinking. We do not denigrate or belittle. We're here for interest in learning with and from each other.
So as we thank you, as we continue, I just want to remind the purpose of our living library that I'm so excited are with us. So our living library today includes Azeb, Kambiz, and Misha or Mikau, right? And they are educators and practitioners, and they bring a wealth of experience and knowledge from which we may learn today. So I encourage you to make notes of your questions as you're hearing this round robin of questions that we will be guiding through. See what emerges that you can bring into your breakout rooms. And then I think at this time, Trina will lead us off with our first question.
Okay, so our first question is, what is one thing you hope participants truly understand about your faith after this session?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I see some familiar faces. Hello, Giti and Bijan. And thank you for the answers of my co-panelists. Now, I will speak about a different thing. I will speak from my personal experience. And I am a scholar of religion, a historian of religion. I taught religion in American universities for about 30 or 35 years. And at the same time, I'm a member of the Baha'i community. But I'm not speaking as an official representative, but as someone who thinks professionally about religion and at the same time lives within this tradition personally. So, what is one thing that I would like the participants to truly understand about the Baha'i faith? If I had to say one thing about the Baha'i faith that feels deeply relevant today, it would be this. It is perhaps the only major religious tradition that does not define itself in opposition to other religions, but seeks to include them within a larger historical framework. Not as a compromise, not as vague pluralism, but as a structure, sometimes described as progressive revelation, in which religions are understood as stages of one unfolding spiritual process. Now, for me, this was not merely an abstract idea. I was born into a mixed identity. My mother is Jewish. My father comes from the Russian Orthodox heritage. And growing up, these were not simply ethnic categories. They carried religious histories, collective memories, different spiritual narratives. And also those narratives were opposed to each other. So at a certain point in my life, I felt internally divided, as if I had to choose one inheritance at the cost of the other. The Baha'i vision did something unexpected for me in this case. It did not ask me to erase one side. It allowed me to hold both. When I became a member of the Baha'i community, I did not feel that I had left Judaism or Christianity behind. Rather, I felt that I had entered a framework in which both became part of a larger spiritual story. And I should say the same about Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. Especially when I teach those religions, I feel being part of them. In a world shaped by globalization, intermarriage, migration, and layered identities, this capacity to integrate rather than oppose may be one of the most necessary spiritual tools of our time. Historically, religions often moved from exclusivism to ecumenism, then to interfaith dialogue. The Baha'i faith goes one step further toward what might be called a meta-religious consciousness, a way of seeing difference as continuity rather than contradiction, without asserting its own superiority. So I would define Baha'i faith as a meta-religion, not as a religion. And religious pluralism suggests that many religions coexist. Interfaith dialogue encourages mutual respect. But a meta-religious perspective goes further. It asks whether religious difference itself may have an internal coherence, whether diversity is not merely tolerated but structurally necessary. In such a view, revelation is historical, truth unfolds, human consciousness matures. This does not eliminate disagreement, but it reframes it. For someone shaped by multiple inheritances, this reframing is not abstract. It becomes existential. Instead of asking which identity must I abandon, the question becomes, how do these inheritances belong to a larger unfolding? And that shift changed everything for me. That is what first drew me intellectually to the Baha'i faith and existentially. Thank you very much.
For each of you, I'd like you to pick either a day or holiday or regular practice you'd like to share. Share with us what it is and how you personally experience it. And I'll go in the reverse order. So I'll start with Mikael.
Okay. So I will be speaking about Rezvan. I would like to share something about the Baha'i holy period called Rezvan. Many religions have a symbolic beginning. Christianity is associated with the birth of Christ, Islam with the Hijrah, the migration from Mecca to Medina. The Baha'i faith begins historically with a declaration. There is something profoundly significant about the declaration. It marks the movement from the inward certainty to public responsibility. Many spiritual experiences remain private. Rezvan represents the moment when inward conviction enters history. Perhaps this is why the festival is associated not only with joy, but with a decision. Every year, during Rezvan, Baha'is elect their governing bodies. There is no campaigning, no self-promotion, no competition. It is a reminder that in this tradition, spiritual authority is inseparable from humility. A declaration is not a conquest, it is a service. In 1863, in a garden outside Baghdad, the Garden of Rezvan, a word that means paradise, Baha'u'llah informed his family and close companions of his prophetic mission. That moment, quiet, intimate, yet historically decisive, marks the beginning of the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i era. Rezvan lasts 12 days. 3 of them are considered especially sacred, the 1st, the 9th, and the 12th. It is during Rezvan that Baha'is around the world hold their annual elections. As I said, without campaigns, without nominations, without political competitions, in an atmosphere of prayer and reflection. The garden itself became a symbol of renewal, of transition, of a new era quietly beginning. Now, here is the personal part. My wife was born on December 25th. And when we came to the United States on December 26th of 1990, we didn't have enough documents to cross the border. And the custom guy stopped us and asked for the documents, the so-called pink form. And somehow I didn't have it. Maybe in the American embassy in Moscow, they took it from me, but I thought I would have a stroke while this custom guy, worker, opened my wife's passport and looked at her birthday and said, "Oh, Christmas baby, welcome to America," and got us the visas. So since then, I call my wife a Christmas baby. And after I became a Baha'i, I also learned that I was born on the 9th day of Rizwan, April 29th. And in our community, friends began calling me half playfully a son of Rizwan. I do not interpret this as a sign. I interpret it as a reminder. When a sacred date becomes part of your own calendar, you experience time differently. Rizwan is not only the historical birth of a religious dispensation, it has also become, for me, a meditation on birth itself, physically and spiritually. The moment when something previously hidden becomes declared, when inward conviction becomes public responsibility. So that is a powerful theme for me, not only religiously, but existentially as well. Thank you.
If we could shift, we're soon going to be going into our small groups, but I'm curious, is there in 2 minutes or so, is there one thing that people often misunderstand about your faith? And is there something that you could or have done to help someone see your faith differently?
I wanted to refer to my Russian experience and Russian heritage, because what I discovered during the last 4 years, and someone asked about the war in Iran and how it affects Baha'i faith, not only the war in Iran, but also the war between Russia and Ukraine greatly affects all religions, including the Baha'i faith, and not in a positive way. And my point was and would be about non-involvement with politics. Baha'is have this principle of not being involved in politics, but it turns out that the principle that seems very clear cut, in the United States, what does it mean? It means you are not becoming a member of any party. You are not involved in partisan politics. You are not involved in glorification and things like that. But you may vote. You have the right to vote, your conscience. You may participate in social actions. You may participate in social causes like interfaith dialogue. While in the circumstances where you live in authoritarian or totalitarian society, like Russia is now, whatever you do is becoming political. You say that you are against the war, you become a political prisoner. You are involved in politics. You say that you like peace, you are involved in politics. So when I talk to Russian Baha'is, I ask them, so how do you manage the situation when whatever you do, you basically are going against the principles of your faith, and at the same time, you have to survive, because otherwise you will be declared the foreign agents, and the Baha'i organization will be closed. And it shows that even clearest principles, like non-involvement in politics, may seem in a different light in different social conditions. Thank you.
As we wrap up, I just want to say again a tremendous thank you, and with gratitude to Azeb, to Misha, to Kambiz for making yourself available, for pouring into us your experiences, and to all of you for being as present as you've been in your breakout rooms and asking the questions that you've had. So really appreciate that.